He speaks softly, but there's something off. You can't explain it because he's calm, composed, articulate. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't threaten. But still, you feel yourself shrinking, diminishing, second-guessing your every word. And that's the trick. It's not aggression that dominates you anymore. It's plausible softness. It's control wrapped in charm. It's the wolf who doesn't growl but speaks like a therapist while leading you into the trap. Because modern manipulation doesn't come with fists. It comes with calm. It comes with words that sound healing but are chosen like weapons. It comes with men who've read the books, learned the language, mastered the tone, but never faced their shadow. And when a man hasn't faced his own shadow, he must control yours. He must suppress your fire, your power, your clarity, not through domination, but through influence. This is the new masculine warfare. It's not about volume. It's about precision. It's not about fear. It's about doubt. It's not about controlling your body. It's about eroding your sense of self. You say he supports you, but somehow you'll feel smaller. He'll say he's all about equality, but he'll position you as the student, the unstable, the still healing. He'll never fight you. He'll gently suggest. He'll use words like energy, alignment, growth. But what he really means is compliance. What he really wants is control. This is not a mistake. This is not confusion. This is calculated. Because nothing is more dangerous than a man who understands language, but not his own psyche. Carl Jung warned us. The shadow that is not made conscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. These men, they call it leadership. They call it emotional maturity. But it's not. It's spiritual bypassing. It's psychological theater. It's a mask that says protector while hiding the predator beneath. And the cost is that people start questioning their own instincts. They start thinking they're too sensitive, too reactive, too broken. Because how could someone who speaks so calmly be unsafe? But safety is not in the tone. It's in the intention. It's in the alignment. It's in whether he's integrated what he's preaching. And most haven't. Because integration isn't pretty. It's not poetic. It's rage. It's grief. It's accountability with no applause. And that they avoid, so they learn how to look healed instead. And now they lead rooms. Now they write books. Now they call themselves guides. But in every word, every subtle dig, every backhanded suggestion, they are building altars to their ego, not bridges to your truth. You can feel it. You've always felt it. That tightness in your gut when their compliments don't land. That glaze in their eyes when you cry and they don't flinch. That script they use when they apologize but never change. This isn't empathy. It's emotional choreography, and it works. Because we've been trained to equate softness with safety. Trained to believe that if he's calm, he must be conscious. But calm is a strategy. And strategy without soul is manipulation. So what does real masculine integrity look like? It looks like shadow work. It looks like confession. It looks like losing the need to always appear good and learning how to simply be true. And that truth, it doesn't always sound soft, but it always feels clean. It doesn't always validate you, but it never confuses you. It never makes you question your worth in the name of growth. It never gaslights your instincts by calling them projections. Real masculine presence doesn't need to dominate your energy to feel powerful. It doesn't need to out-talk your intuition. It doesn't need to reframe your reality just to keep control of the room. Because a man who's actually grounded doesn't need to perform stillness. He is still because he's faced the chaos inside himself and made peace with it. Not by masking it, but by integrating it. And in that integration, there is no need to control anyone. There is only the desire to liberate, to hold space so purely that you rise in his presence, not shrink in his shadow. Because when a man has truly done the work, he no longer needs to hide behind gentle tones and calculated pauses. He doesn't use vulnerability as a marketing tactic. He doesn't turn healing into a hierarchy. He doesn't make you feel like you're always one step behind his enlightenment. He meets you fully, openly, humanly. And in that meeting, there's no performance, no intellectual superiority masked as spiritual mentorship. No quiet punishment when you speak your boundaries. No gaslit reframing when your intuition doesn't align with his agenda. He listens not to respond, but to understand. He holds not because he's trying to be needed, but because presence is his default. He leads not to be followed, but to remind others they can lead themselves. This is the man who's no longer afraid of being exposed, because he has nothing to protect, no persona to defend, no illusion to sell. And in this clarity, his energy becomes safe, not because it's soft, but because it's true, because there's a massive difference between being calm and being clear, between being non-reactive and being integrated, between being soft-spoken and being soul-aligned. Clarity doesn't always come in gentle language, but it never confuses you. Integration doesn't always look poetic, but it never makes you doubt yourself. Real leadership doesn't always flatter, but it never manipulates. And here's the brutal truth. Some of the most dangerous men in the world today don't raise their voice, don't use threats, they use language. They use your growth against you. They co-opt the words of healing to keep you unsure, unsteady, unsettled. Because if you're always working on yourself, you'll never ask why they never change. You'll never ask why you feel smaller after every conversation. You'll never question how their softness feels more like control than care. And that's how the game continues. That's how modern masculine manipulation survives. By hiding behind good intentions, by speaking softly while steering the entire narrative, by staying just conscious enough to avoid accountability. But consciousness without confrontation is just performance. And performance cannot hold you. It can only use you to feel significant, to feel dominant, to feel superior in a room full of people they've convinced are still healing. But you're not here to orbit someone else's illusion. You're not here to be molded by a man who can speak fluently about love, but lives completely in fear. You're here to wake up, to reclaim the space that his manipulation slowly shrank, to trust what your body always knew, that just because he's soft doesn't mean he's safe. Because power that isn't integrated, no matter how gently it speaks, will always try to bend you. But now, you bend for no one. Because once you've seen the subtle architecture of his control, you can't unsee it. Once you've felt the difference between charm and character, between presence and performance, between a man who listens and a man who waits to speak again, you can't pretend it's anything but manipulation. Not loud, not obvious, not even intentional sometimes, but manipulation nonetheless. And now you reason not with rage, but with recognition. You rise with the understanding that truth doesn't need a soft voice to be valid. It doesn't need polished words or spiritual vocabulary to be powerful. It needs to be lived, felt, embodied, and embodiment can't be faked. It doesn't hide behind holding space while simultaneously silencing you. It doesn't whisper empathy while secretly demanding control. It doesn't ask you to stay small just so he can feel big. You're done being shrunk, done being groomed by men who've never faced their shame, done being told to be more receptive, more open, when what they really mean is less threatening, less powerful, less sovereign. But your power is no longer up for negotiation. Your intuition is no longer a liability to be doubted. Your fire is no longer something to be tamed by false calmness. Because now you see, not just him, but the part of yourself that kept tolerating it. The part that mistook politeness for peace. The part that thought safety lived in softness when it never did. Safety lives in truth. And truth is not always gentle, but it is always clear. So now you become the kind of presence that no manipulator can withstand. Not because you fight them, but because you no longer need anything from them. Not approval, not explanation, not even closure. You are no longer under their spell, because your voice is no longer under their volume. You've reclaimed it, not with vengeance, with vision. A vision of relationships built on mutual clarity. A vision of love that doesn't distort itself to protect someone's ego. A vision of leadership that doesn't rely on psychological games, but on radical honesty and deep embodied respect. And from this vision, you lead yourself. And no man can manipulate a woman or anyone who is self-led, who is no longer mesmerized by soft words, but anchored in solid worth. So let him keep his performance. You've got something better now. You've got clarity. Clarity unshakable, unapologetic, sovereign. It doesn't need to raise its voice. It doesn't need to explain itself 12 times. It doesn't second guess its knowing just because someone sounds convincing. Clarity is the clean flame that burns through performance. Through rehearsed apologies, through spiritual language that smells like incense but cuts like a blade. Because you've tasted the bitterness of being pacified, of being gently silenced, of being praised on the surface while being strategically dismantled underneath. Now you know, when a man uses softness to gain power, that's not tenderness, that's strategy. And strategy without soul is manipulation in its most modern form. So you stop playing the game. You stop translating his tone into trust. You stop measuring his leadership by how many times he says, holding space. You stop giving your intuition up for analysis. You stop letting anyone use their healing as a reason not to be accountable. You rise, rooted in the kind of strength that doesn't need to be louder, because it cannot be shaken. The kind of strength that's had to stand in rooms full of men who spoke like priests but moved like puppeteers. The kind of strength that had to learn the difference between care and control the hard way. The kind of strength that no longer mistakes calmness for safety, but demands congruence, because words without embodiment are just decoration. And calm without character is just manipulation in velvet. So now you live different. You lead different. You love different. You don't perform softness just to be palatable. You don't apologize for your clarity just to protect his fragility. You don't shrink your brilliance to fit into someone else's broken definition of divine feminine, because the divine doesn't dim, and neither do you. You shine now. Fully, fiercely, finally. You speak from the core. You move from your marrow. You trust what you know, because what you know has been earned, not taught. And if a man wants to meet you, he'll have to stop performing. He'll have to stop posturing. He'll have to stop practicing control in a soft voice and calling it love. He'll have to get honest, because you are no longer seduced by language. You are magnetized only by truth. And truth doesn't wear a costume. It doesn't need perfect cadence or curated words. It doesn't masquerade behind spirituality or hide in poetic tones. Truth stands, even when it shakes, even when it's raw, even when it's uncomfortable to hear and even harder to say. You now live by that truth. Not because it's easy, but because it's clean. Because it doesn't twist, doesn't turn, doesn't sweet talk its way out of accountability. You've outgrown manipulation dressed as mindfulness. You've seen the shadow behind the script, and you no longer fear it because you've faced your own. That's the difference. You've done the work. You've bled on the floor of your own reckoning. You've rebuilt your identity not on influence, not on charm, but on alignment. And a person rooted in alignment becomes unmanipulable because they don't need approval. They don't negotiate truth. They don't confuse guilt with growth. You now know the feel of real safety. It's not soft. It's solid. It's not how someone speaks. It's how they show up. Especially when the room gets tense. Especially when the mask has to come off. You've lived through the charmers. The ones who respected your emotions until your emotions challenged their control. The ones who supported your growth until it grew past their influence. The ones who honored your strength until that strength held them accountable. But that version of you, the one who kept trying to stay soft enough to be loved, quiet enough to be accepted, small enough to be safe, she's gone. She's not coming back because your softness is no longer a survival mechanism. It's a choice, a gift, a medicine not to be extracted, but to be earned. And if someone wants to walk with you now, they walk beside as an equal, with clarity, with presence, with work behind their words. Because love that manipulates is not love. It's fear with a pretty voice. And you are no longer afraid. You're clear. You're grounded. You're done with the soft voice that hides hard control. Now, you only move with what's real. And everything else burns. Let it burn. Let the rehearsed apologies turn to ash. Let the performative softness collapse under the weight of your discernment. Let every manipulative whisper wrapped in healing disintegrate in the fire of your knowing. You don't owe your grace to those who weaponized it. You don't owe your time to those who spiritualized their control. You don't owe your trust to voices that only sounded safe, but were never rooted in safety. Because trust is not built on language. It's built on embodiment. It's how they move when no one's watching. It's how they hold you when you're not agreeing. It's how they respond when your truth disrupts their illusion. And now your nervous system knows the difference. It knows the voice that comforts but contracts you. It knows the man who smiles but siphons your sense of self. It knows the teachings that sound sacred but leave you silenced. You've lived through the performance. Now you're living beyond it. And what you've become on the other side is untouchable. Not because you're hardened, but because you're whole. Your voice no longer wavers to keep the peace. Your energy no longer folds to avoid their discomfort. Your worth is no longer on the negotiation table. You no longer fear being too much, because you now know you were never too much. They were just too controlling to hold someone whole. So now you speak clearly, you love freely, you lead yourself. And when the next soft-spoken manipulator appears with a polished tone and rehearsed compassion, you'll see it before they speak. You'll feel the dissonance between their words and their energy. You'll recognize the absence of integration. And you won't flinch. You won't freeze. You won't doubt yourself for a second. Because now you no longer listen to how soft their voice is. You listen to how true their soul is. And anything that isn't real can't reach you anymore. Because what's false no longer finds a home in your nervous system. It no longer lingers in your chest. It no longer cloaks itself in your empathy and calls it intimacy. You've rewired your tolerance. Not to be harder, colder, or cruel, but to be cleaner, to be fiercely committed to your inner clarity. You don't need to armor up. You don't need to scan every word. Because your center is so calibrated now that anything misaligned burns on contact. Your boundaries are no longer barriers. They are filter sacred thresholds of energy. Not because you fear being hurt, but because you finally understand. Not everyone who speaks the language of healing has learned the lesson of it. You no longer fall for conscious communication. When it lacks conscious connection, you no longer mistake spiritual fluency for spiritual maturity. You no longer confuse restraint for depth. Because true depth doesn't just sound composed. It feels congruent. It meets your truth, not redirects it. It invites your full power, not resents it. It honors your instincts, not edits them. You've stopped asking, why does this feel off, even though his words are right? Because now you know. You feel the gap between what's said and what's true, and you don't question yourself anymore. You don't shrink to fit someone else's practiced stillness. You don't betray your gut to stay in rooms that praise the mask and punish the mirror. You are the mirror now, and you're no longer afraid to reflect what's real. You are the mirror that shows people where they're still pretending, where they are still performing peace while avoiding their shadow, where they're still using emotional intelligence as a shield from emotional accountability. And in your presence, those performances collapse. Not because you expose them, but because you don't participate in them. Your life now is a temple of alignment, and no softly spoken controller can worship there. You've come too far. You've faced too much. You've integrated too deeply. You are no longer a mirror they can fog with flattery. You are no longer a heart they can shape with suggestion. You are the one who ended the cycle. Not by screaming, not by proving, but by remembering who you are and never abandoning that again. You don't abandon yourself anymore, not to maintain harmony, not to avoid conflict, not to keep someone else comfortable in their illusion of control. You've become fluent in your own truth. And when you speak now, it's not for approval, it's for liberation. You no longer flinch when someone challenges you, because you're no longer afraid of being wrong. You've outgrown the need to appear perfect, composed, or unshakable, because you've tasted what it means to be real. And real, unlike performance, has nothing to prove. You walk differently now, not with arrogance, but with a sacred groundedness that says, I am not here to be managed. I am not here to be mirrored back a diluted version of my power. I am here to live it, fully, loudly when it needs to roar, softly when it needs to listen, but always truthfully. And if that truth costs you someone who needed to keep you in their orbit of influence, so be it. You're no longer the satellite. You're the sun, and those who cannot stand in your light without controlling it will fall away. That's not loss. That's clarity doing its job. That's your intuition cleansing what your words no longer need to explain. You've reclaimed your time, your boundaries, your voice, and now you walk into every room knowing no soft-spoken manipulator can outsmart the stillness inside you, because that stillness wasn't learned in books. It was earned in battle, in moments where your nervous system screamed to fold, and you stayed with yourself, held the fire, held the truth, held the line, and now you are the line. You are the standard. You are the storm they cannot seduce. So let them whisper. Let them posture. Let them dress control in the soft silk of emotional jargon. It no longer lands. because you no longer live at the mercy of tone. You live at the frequency of truth. And truth embodied cannot be manipulated, not even by the gentlest voice in the room. So now, let their words come soft. Let their voices stay low. Let their language drip with curated calm. You will not flinch. You will not fold. You will not shrink to fit the silence of manipulation disguised as mindfulness, because you've come home to yourself. You've walked through the fire of false softness. You've stared into the smile that tried to steal your truth. And you chose clarity over comfort. You no longer chase the man who sounds right. You stand with the one who lives right. And if that man is not yet in the room, you still rise. You still lead. You still speak. Because you are no longer afraid of the quiet voice with the hard grip. You've seen the grip. You've broken free. And now you are the voice. You are the stillness. You are the flame that cannot be coached into silence. They can whisper, but you've already roared, and there is no going back.